I do recall a colleague early on when I was there who kind of like, whispered somewhere at the water cooler, "Hey, you're doing things too fast." It's like, well, isn't that how you're supposed to do them? I mean, if you're at a startup founder, you don't really know any other pace in some respects of like if you're trying to push something to market or you're trying to follow up on sales leads. So that was kind of the initial observation and learning and navigating decision-making processes in different industrial sectors.
Welcome to EIR Live, where we dive into the lives and lessons of entrepreneurs in residence. I'm Ilya Tabak, together with my co-host Terrence Orr, ready to bring you closer to the heartbeat of the innovation and entrepreneurial spirit. Every episode, we explore the real stories behind the ideas, successes, setbacks, and everything in between. For everyone from aspiring EIRs to seasoned pros, EIR Live is your gateway to the depth of the entrepreneurial journey and bringing innovative insights into the broader world. Check out the full details in the episode description, subscribe to stay updated, and join us as we uncover what it takes to transform visions into ventures. Welcome aboard. Let's grow together.
Man, I really enjoyed this episode a ton. Talking to Rachel was just a breath of fresh air. I learned a ton, by the way, around biofuels and the biodiesel world, and just watching you two geek out was sort of like a joyous moment for me, just to learn a little bit more. And I think our audience is going to learn a little bit more. But when I think about the key takeaways from this episode and the things that stuck out to me the most, there's two words that really stick out to me, and it's risk taker and charting your own path and sort of the road less traveled. It's sort of the two buckets I'm going to put, Rachel in, and risk taker in the sense that, my goodness, talk about somebody who's willing to take the leap, with very little insight about what's on the other side, but just a gut feeling, right? And the conviction that she could do it, right? And go into a new space that was unconventional at the time, for anybody to go into and to really just chart her own path. So the first thing that stuck out to me is, one, she took the leap of faith to jump into this new space from mechanics to biofuel and learning everything along the way, and became an expert in it along the way and a go-to person in that space now and probably couldn't imagine seeing herself doing anything else. She did that after undergrad and went into a trade after undergrad. Love that for the story. The other piece of it is just sort of just being, able to chart her own path and taking the road less traveled. These are two themes that we see a lot in the EIRs that we bring on the show. And Rachel, 10x that in terms of, showing the audience how you navigate uncharted waters in a way that's unconventional, but also a bit of an educator. But I'm not going to steal the thunder there because I want you to talk more about that, and I'm going to pass it over to you. What were your reactions to the episode?
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. So to your point a little bit earlier, it was nice to be able to sort of connect on the biofuel point. And I'm glad that we had the opportunity to sort of peel that back a little bit through the discussion. Cause I've definitely been over the years, somewhat guilty of forgetting to fill in the, fuel comes traditionally, it's called fossil fuel because it comes from oil. And then when you have biofuel, it comes from biological constituents, whether it's, soybean or maybe used oil. And then there's all kinds of conversion processes that you have to do in order for it to start to look like a drop-in replacement. And we didn't fully get to all that, but it was nice sort of going back and forth and being able to sort of jump into some of the details there. And I think it's, I think it's important, and I'm glad that you kind of forced us a little bit to, kind of cover some of the gaps that, we were both so into it that we didn't necessarily establish some of the fundamentals and basics. So that was great. And it's always good to sort of connect with somebody after 10 or 15 years of, both of us have essentially moved on from biofuels directly, although, still some connection there. So that was great. I think the other part, the teacher part, I think throughout Rachel's journey, she's been an individual contributor, a teacher, then back to an individual contributor, and then again, sort of a mentor, a resource for folks as they build their companies. And I think actually jumping back and forth, especially once you do the kind of teacher research thing a second and a third time, gives you some really interesting and good perspectives that you can sort of lean upon and say, hey, when I did this last time, this was really useful, but maybe I can try it again in a different way. And I think, I've sort of enjoyed both that perspective, but also kind of the eagerness, kind of the desire to keep doing it, right? Thinking about what can you do with the application of a venture studio? How can you support the ecosystem? That kind of thing. So I thought that was great. And then the other thing is, I'm always convinced that the world's a tiny little village. And I think, the discussion with Rachel and really thinking about how, Kansas City, Atlanta, RTP, kind of North Carolina are all connected to each other. We found at least 3 or 4 central nodes to press on. And it's going to be fun when we release the episode to sort of highlight the collaboration and all the really great interconnectivity in the RTP and the kind of North Carolina ecosystem. And then, sort of connect the dots even beyond. And so it was great to be able to sort of identify that. And of course, there's always everybody's 1 hop or 2 hops away from each other. And I think we sort of doubled down and proved it again. So excited that everybody got a chance to kind of dive into that conversation and that we were able to bring Rachel in to sort of dig in and connect with us.
Absolutely, man. I'm pumped for our audience to hear more about this episode. It's going to be very enlightening for people.
All right. One of the things that's really exciting for me about the EIR network and generally kind of the innovation ecosystem in general is how kind of small, connected, and ultimately at the end of the day, how you see kind of folks over different chapters of their professional career. So what's cool is Rachel and I first ran into each other when we were both in kind of biofuels land. And I think she'll get into that a little bit more later in the discussion. But she was doing some really awesome stuff in the Carolinas. And I was kind of in the middle of the country in Lawrence, but I, was kind of following what was happening. And what's cool is, later, that was probably 12, almost 15 years ago. And both of us have, kind of taken multiple steps in our kind of career journey path, whatever you want to call it since then. So it's really cool to sort of see how folks kind of make a career, make a path, and how sometimes nobody, when looking back, it's sort of unexpected in some ways. And so I'm really excited to have Rachel Burton with us today for another episode of EIR Live. Maybe to get just started and jump into the discussion, Rachel, maybe we'll kind of start from the beginning. What was kind of your first encounter professionally? Like, how'd you get started? And then we can kind of go from there and jump in.
First off, thank you for having me on the program. I'm super excited as engaged in the entrepreneur in residence community and talking with both of you. Of how I got involved in entrepreneurship, I would say I truly accidentally fell into it, as many people do. I studied agriculture. I had studied auto mechanics, and ironically, the two of those, both the automotive technology, the agriculture, as well as some interest in food and food waste, all of those kind of combined together, ironically kind of ended up in starting a biofuels company that is based in central North Carolina. And that was almost 20 years ago. That was Piedmont Biofuels. And I think we started in 2005. 2005.
Yeah. Well, it's easy to add the decades now. Yeah. Because I definitely leave that on and off. How did you meet the founders and things like that? Was it because a lot of those stories, people kind of know each other, have worked each other a little bit. It's always an interesting kind of story. How did you get into starting? Did you have co-founders? Did you start it yourself? Tell us more about that a little bit.
Sure. So Piedmont Biofuels kind of was incubated literally in a garage outside of the Raleigh-Durham area. At the time, I was a high school and college level auto mechanics teacher, and I was teaching high school auto mechanics in the morning and college level auto mechanics in the evening, and was just generally interested. I was kind of co-located in this agricultural program, and I was generally interested in kind of seeing if there's an opportunity to connect agriculture and renewable energy. And this was many years ago when, long before kind of, battery or EV technology was available to the consumer. And there was a strong interest in reducing gas prices or diesel prices. I had an interest in looking at reducing waste in the automotive industry, and then also having an impact on, cleaner emissions. Through kind of just a small network or connectivity, I met Mike, who ended up being my co-founders. I teamed up with a friend of mine named Leaf, who had just finished a degree in sustainable fuels technology or sustainable technologies. He was based in the New Jersey area and actually moved down to North Carolina. And we decided to teach a class together in biofuels. The community college where I taught automotive essentially gave me the chemistry lab that was being used for night nursing classes. And they kind of gave me permission and license to teach biofuels technology, both in the automotive garage as well as the chemistry lab.
Nice. It's actually interesting. So both agriculture and, kind of mechanic are very high in problem solving and sort of systems and things like that. Was there, it's actually when we were talking in the preparation for this episode, we were talking about how folks are doing a lot of kind of mechanical education, even to teach kind of STEM skills and things like that. Did you see kind of that problem solving and kind of systems approach to stuff being helpful to you as you dove into Piedmont?
I don't think I knew it. It was maybe intuitive in some way of being able to not be afraid of taking on hands-on challenges. And then also, as an automotive technician, you learn a specific methodology of troubleshooting problems. And so then you kind of get into this mindset of troubleshooting trees. And I think that helped in kind of developing a methodology of not only critical thinking, but problem solving.
Very interesting. I want to dive in here just a little bit because one, I do want to ask you about the drivers behind what got you into this in the first place. What made you go to school for this in the first place, to want to solve problems around food and automotive waste and the other things that you wanted to do in that space? That I just want to know what motivated that journey for you to do it. So I'll pause there for a second, and then I have another question that I want to ask you.
So I actually had no intention in going to trade school after finishing my undergraduate degree. I kind of did it backwards. And I was taking some classes in the ag program because I was working on a local farm. And I took a class in tractors, tillers, and lawnmowers. It's essentially small engine repair. And I had just purchased an older pickup truck in which I thought was going to be my farm truck. The transmission soon became quite an issue. And the gentleman who taught the small engine repair class was also the automotive instructor at the college. And he said, well, if you're interested, I'll show you how to repair your transmission. I'll show you how to replace it. And I was like, well, of course, who wouldn't? And the short story is, after replacing the transmission, this person convinced me that I should go to auto mechanic school. He was like, well, you're not half bad at this. He didn't say I was half good either, but But at the time in central North Carolina, there was opportunities for young women who wanted to go into non-traditional careers. If you wanted to be a welder, a motorcycle mechanic, an auto mechanic, or if you wanted to be an electrician, they would pay for you to have, you would essentially get a scholarship for a trades degree and then buy you a set of tools and then help you get a job. And so I actually went down that trade route and worked at a Ford dealership. I worked at a GM Chevrolet dealership. And then I also worked for an eclectic auto mechanic who specialized in like Volvos and Volkswagens and Peugeots.
That's super interesting. And the reason why I wanted to ask you this question first, because there's a trend between already that I'm seeing in your background between guests that come on the show, which is they always do things in a very unconventional way, right? And for whatever reason, at the time, they don't even know why, but they take the leap to try something new anyway, right? And you did this in a very unconventional way. You went to undergrad and then you went to a trade school. Usually people go to a community college and then they go to undergrad or they transfer over or they do a trade school first and then go get an undergrad degree. You decided that, so what? I'm just going to try it anyway. I'm into it. Why not? Right. And built the whole career off the back of that from that foundation. So I just don't want that to get lost in the things that we're about to get into in your background as we set the table for the rest of the podcast. Now, thinking about that time, you started to tell us about that time in North Carolina for young women getting into trades. Can you set the table for our audience talking about what was the biofuel sort of space like during that season, of when you were starting to, you built in Piedmont, right? That you did what you had to do there. It's starting to transition. You're about to make your next leap soon, which we're going to ask you about. What was the climate like at that time for this industry, for this space? If you can educate our audience just a little bit.
I would say the biofuel industry was in a very early and growing and energized area. It's, how we ended up evolving from just giving a community class on biofuels and like how to make your own biofuel actually started with the state energy office. There was someone in the state energy office who called the community college and said, "Hey, we hear you're leading a class on biofuels." And there wasn't anyone at any of the larger four-year institutions, universities that were either teaching specifically on that. And they asked that I apply to this grant program. And it was a demonstration program where they were like, "Hey, we really want somebody to build a reactor on a trailer and maybe drive it around and teach farmers about biofuels. Is that interesting to you?" And I was like, "Well, I have a 3-bay garage. I have a diesel truck that runs on biofuels. I could probably get a trailer and work that out." And that's how we ended up gravitating from the class to actual kind of pilot scale production. And that kind of led into more of a buyer's co-op. It's just like each one was a little bit of a domino.
Yeah. And just to jump in, my experience in sort of the biofuel industry at that time was a lot of, demonstration reactors and sort of thinking about, because at the time, kind of corn-based ethanol was something that was known and was sort of more scaled. So you saw these sort of industrial scale plants. And then there's sort of a cycle for when it made sense to make fuel, and there's, kind of a couple cycles of opening, closing, things like that. But on the biodiesel side, in Europe, they did a lot of work in kind of using rapeseed oil in order to start to make a biofuel, biodiesel. There's not a lot of rapeseed in the US, but soybean oil looks pretty similar to rapeseed oil. And so there's a lot of work in thinking about, hey, can you use soybean oil? Could you use used oil? And so it was really interesting because it was kind of wild west in some ways, because people, were generally interested just for, observation and things like that, but then also started to think about, hey, can we make this a business? Where can you get enough oil or spent tallow or whatever for it to be useful? What happens when you use tallow for fuel? And, all this, we won't dive too far into that, but it was really interesting to see just like the early formation. I really do think, at least for the commercial, like biodiesel industry, that was like super early days, and sort of seeing different types of players there and how they thought about the world and operated was, at least for me, it was a good experience.
I would say that we had a very similar journey of like, originally we started the facility once we had actually acquired an abandoned industrial park, which was kind of just across the town from the community college. We started that facility on soybean oil. That was kind of just traditional, refined, bleached, deodorized soybean oil. But the pricing of that kind of dictated a shift to something that was lower quality. And since we were in central North Carolina, we shifted over to poultry fat. We were one of, I think, 3 or 4 industrial facilities that were capable of making that shift because it was really challenging. And then ultimately we built out our own supply chain, which was collecting used cooking oil and lower fats, oils, and greases to convert into biodiesel.
Yeah, so it's cool. Maybe just to kind of summarize what I heard, it was like a little bit of a, hey, can you build this sort of trailer mounted reactor for just education and help people wrap their heads around it? Then you kind of are operating this reactor. You have, now knowledge to sort of scale it up and get to a place where, it kind of becomes a commercial operation. And then sort of the input, kind of the feedstock, sort of the inputs into your process drive you into having to adopt different feedstock, which means that there's all kinds of different production and mechanical, and fortunately it doesn't get too cold in North Carolina, but also some cold weather differences between animal fat and sort of soybean oil. And so you get into all kinds. Is that kind of a fair progression of how things went at Piedmont?
I would say that that's a pretty good progression. There was like one little chapter in there before from the like pilot scale in terms of like crawling, walking, and running, where we built out our distribution business. So before we actually built a larger scale commercial operation, we actually bought a truck. We just bought an old fuel truck. We started buying other people's biodiesel and we started distributing it. Leif and I and our other co-founder, Lyle, also, we kept teaching classes at the community college. And it was just an organic user buyer. We built the community that we didn't know that we were building our buyers and our users, but we every year or every semester we would graduate, another 20 people who at that time were like, hey, I'm looking for something, an alternative vehicle. And there weren't EVs really out on the market unless you were going to like rip out your entire gasoline engine and put a whole huge battery bank that didn't quite exist on the marketplace. But yeah, so it was like kind of pilot production, kind of bench scale, and then building out distribution, and then eventually the commercial production side.
Yeah, that's I just want to, by the way, just kind of highlight, once you start operating, the experiences and sort of insights that you get are very different than, when you kind of thought about what am I going to do. And so one of the roles of kind of EIRs and, folks like that are to take kind of experience and insights and sort of translate it into a new context. But one of the issues that I always have is sort of explaining that, hey, there's a difference between, what happens and how you thought about it was going to happen in the first place, right? And so like in a lot of strategy discussions and things like that, you can normally tell the difference between sort of an operator and then just kind of a pure strategist, because sort of the way that they think about the world is very different. And so as you're talking about the, sort of distribution, education, two-sided marketplace, commercial scale up, there's so many different things in there that, I'm sure we'll peel back on some of that. But it's just like, it's funny to say that, we did those things. It's a whole different thing from what did you learn? What did you do? I just, sort of want to point that out because as folks, kind of work with you today and in the future, there's all these insights that are kind of available just because you were out in the world doing it. And so I think it's just kind of don't want to kind of go on in the conversation without highlighting that for us.
And this was a great chapter of your career, obviously, Rachel, right? But tell us about the next chapter. You did something interesting next where you were negotiating licensing deals. Tell the people for who and what did you do in that role?
Maybe part of the next chapter is connected to this question that you guys asked, which was, what was the significant challenge that taught you the most in your career? You kind of prepped on that one. And that question really is kind of this impetus around where innovation happened at Piedmont. So we had two challenges. To me, the significant challenge was the importance of water infrastructure in manufacturing. Our industrial park was at the edge of the town, so its water supply and the wastewater connection ultimately became the place for not only creative thinking, but the opportunity for innovation. Because we were limited on our ability to discharge wastewater, and if you know anything about biodiesel production, one of the side streams that came off of biodiesel can be essentially a soapy waste stream. So like water, it's basic. You use water to kind of scrub the soap out of the fuel. And it's something that you have to dispose of. But we had limitations in our ability to discharge or dispose of this wastewater. So we had to think about how can we, instead of just like treating it and like managing this disposal as like a cost center, is there a way that we can reverse engineer and not create soapy wastewater as a whole? And I was lucky enough in my career and in research and in the biodiesel industry to have really great mentors. And I had a mentor at the USDA, the Department of Agriculture, who mentored me at the American Oil Chemists Society, as well as introduced the concepts of using industrial enzymes as catalysts. And that was essentially the place where we looked at, can we replace the catalyst in the chemical process so that we don't make this soapy wastewater? So yeah, that was the kind of hotbed for where we had our innovation, and that created an opportunity to develop a strategic partnership with Novozymes, which is now called Novozymes. And we developed that partnership and looked at building technology for the biodiesel industry outside of a research collaboration there.
Yeah, I just love my favorite driver for innovation is necessity. And so it's always way better when you're like, hey, we have a problem. How can we solve that problem? As opposed to, hey, we have this awesome mechanical chemical technique to do whatever. Who's got the problem? Right. And so it's awesome to be like, hey, we have this thing. It's a bottleneck, probably will limit how much production we have. So it's cool that you guys, kind of had the problem to bring to the solution, not the other way around. And it's interesting to, kind of connect it to a different, because a lot of those problems are transferable. So it's cool that it goes. So where does that take you? Kind of as Terrence was going to the next chapter.
So in the process of like commercializing the biodiesel technology, there was an opportunity for me to move over and work under the Novozymes umbrella. And that was essentially the next chapter of my career, is working in different roles at Novozymes in the bioenergy industry. So some of that was working in the bioethanol space, and then also supporting the biodiesel space and how that technology met the marketplace as well.
What was that role like? Is that sort of using that background and thinking about kind of enzymatic approaches to different problems, or what is kind of the day to day? I bet you that was a little bit of a whiplash going from an operating sort of startup to, more of like would you call it like a technical sales role or like research, or what did that ultimately translate into?
I think the original title was called Industrial Technology Specialist, which means anything really. There was somewhat of a culture shock of having been inside of your own startup for close to 10 years and then moving into a very large global organization that's heavily invested in the research and development and learning their process of innovation development, product development, and how they launch products. So I found it like I kind of just soaked it up because I was kind of just interested in the process of technology commercialization and seeing how not only how the specific molecules were developed, but how the mode of supporting technologies from a service side, so that we had a whole element of service innovation.
Yeah, it's maybe digging into that a little bit, sort of the pace and the role. When I became an EIR, kind of most recently, I found myself to be kind of a spiritual leader where, for the entrepreneurial part of my career, I was used to being sort of a hardline leader, be able to get the resources and have the executive authority to do what I needed to do. And so for me, that was like a pretty surprising experience. How was it? What was kind of the most surprising thing? Was it the pace, or, I guess maybe initially, and then you were there for a little while. So, kind of maybe first impression and then sort of maybe the biggest difference as you settled into it a little bit.
I think initially the pace, I do recall a colleague early on when I was there who kind of like, whispered somewhere at the water cooler, "Hey, you're doing things too fast." It's like, well, isn't that how you're supposed to do them? I mean, if you're at a startup founder, you don't really know any other pace in some respects of like, if you're trying to push something to market or you're trying to, follow up on sales leads. So that was kind of the initial observation, and learning and navigating, decision-making processes in different industrial sectors, like, how the ethanol industry might have had specific decisions, whereas biodiesel was actually at that time inside the corporation, kind of, it had its own decision-making process as it was sitting kind of in a different industry group. I think having been there for a number of years, there was looking at how a global corporation makes supply chain decisions and how they prioritize certain products around the market demand was a very interesting lesson once I was kind of integrated and had that insight, even though I wasn't on the actual enzyme production side. I was more on the product launch and product innovation side.
Yeah, for me, that's actually one of the interesting things. Once you actually like dig in and get to know the organization that you're kind of embedded in, there's certain things that don't make sense initially that ultimately end up making sense, and I think that's kind of one of the interesting things for, experts in residence, entrepreneurs in residence is, the residence does some things for a reason, not everything is just weird and slow and whatnot. Right. And it's really interesting to sort of, for me at least, to be able to, in engineering and construction, safety culture is a big thing, right? Because when you're on the job site or something like that, there's a million things that can go wrong. And so there's all kinds of different sort of process and ultimately kind of cultural things that you do in order to manage that. And certain things didn't sort of make sense looking from the outside, like really outside in, but once you're kind of on the fence, you get to a better view. It was sort of interesting to see. So it sounds like you were able to observe, some things like that as well, because, Novozymes and those guys are, older companies, more established, have a sort of longer view on their markets, their industries, things like that. So that's one of the things that I really kind of came to appreciate in being embedded and partnered with companies.
Now, I really enjoy hearing your stories about being inside of a larger company versus running your own company. I spent the last few years helping large companies build companies, right? And when you think about that, it's sort of, they go against each other a lot, right? Larger companies are optimized for efficiency and startups are optimized for speed, right? And execution. And they just don't go together at oftentimes. So I sort of wanted to chuckle out loud when you said, you're doing things too fast. And it was like, isn't it supposed to be this way? Why are you guys moving so slow? Right. And so on and so forth. And that's just the pace that they're used to. And it's sort of this push and pull, like against each other. But what I'm grateful for with those experiences is that it taught me how to be bilingual, right? I can speak corporate, I can speak startup, and I know sort of how they operate in both environments. That sort of made me adaptable, right? When I became my EIR for the first time, and now I'm 3X EIR, so it seems a little bit weird at the time. But talk to us about that experience, right? The podcast is all about people making the leap to this mysterious role called the entrepreneur in residence. When did you first hear about the EIR role? Did you know what it was? And what made you take the leap to do it?
After I left Novozymes for a couple of years, and it was a great experience. I got to have several different insights into kind of the corporate innovation pipeline. I wanted to give back into startups and kind of connect back into my roots. And I had an opportunity to take a technology commercialization specialist role at UNC Chapel Hill in North Carolina. And I was already embedded at UNC through the Small Business Center. And there was this group at UNC, which is their accelerator program, which is called Kickstart Venture Services. And they were building out their entrepreneur in residence team. And I just got an email one day and they said, hey, we'd like you to be an EIR. You're already advising UNC professors and UNC startups. Can we just include you? So I didn't even apply for it. But I was so grateful that I got to have that experience, because there were other activities inside UNC Chapel Hill. There was like this venture catalyst program where we got to take students who essentially were developing in their own EIR capacity. They were looking at they wanted to build their entrepreneurship skill set. So they were kind of paired with EIRs and startup companies, startup founders to tackle a specific problem or look at their commercialization plan or do customer discovery interviews, those type of things.
Absolutely. What was it like being back inside of the walls of a university or academic setting, having done teaching sort of a long time ago, building a company inside of a large company, and now you're back on the other side, helping people sort of build their dreams, right? And helping them commercialize technology. You're back in the walls of a university now, helping them out, using your entrepreneurial chops. How was that experience?
I like being able to kind of like break down connections of like seeing a problem in a holistic way and knowing, oh, I can't solve that, but I know a person who can solve that for you. And let's get you that introduction. Or here is a potential strategic investor or an opportunity where you could pull in a strategic investor. Or there were a couple of times that I was leaned on to bring in somebody who was an executive who wanted to lead the company, and going out and finding and curating kind of a list or a group of people for a university professor. So I kind of saw it as like connective tissue.
Ooh, okay. I like that word. I like connective tissue because I like connecting people and things. So let me build on this a little bit because I love you using the word connective tissue, which I look at universities as a connective tissue in a lot of ecosystems to do a lot of different things. Did you have to directly help recruit people to those companies and ventures that were going to be commercialized at the university? And if so, how hard was it to convince somebody to come be the founder or CEO of a university spin-out company based off their technology and IP?
Yes. So there were at least one or two times that I was helping recruit somebody. And it is extremely challenging if there is a huge bank of patents, like someone is very prolific in their research and very intelligent in developing kind of a patent portfolio. But then you have this connection with the technology transfer office and an interest in kind of having the technologies licensed out or having a company spin out, and the founder or the professor not knowing which area do I want to be on? Do I want to be a chief scientific officer or do I want to be a CEO founder? And helping them kind of navigate that area. I think there's an opportunity for EIRs to really shine and helping, founders understand, are they really founder ready?
It sounds like you were one of the things that I think that you need to be an effective entrepreneur in residence is sort of know what you're good at, connect with a place that sort of appreciates it and has sort of done the homework a little bit. And then maybe a little bit of retooling for skills, right? Because it's a different thing to be a coach than a player. But it sounds like there was a really good sort of give and take and dynamic between sort of you and the folks you were embedded with. And so can you talk about that a little bit? I've seen a lot of EIR roles where you're like, here's the 3 things you do, EIR. You have office hours, you do this thing. And the EIR is like, they're really not using me, but that's what they want. So that's what they want. It sounds like you were able to, kind of participate in informing your role a little bit. I'd love to kind of have you dive into that a little bit more because it sounds like it was a good situation or is a good situation.
There wasn't a short leash and you could meet the founder or the startup where they were at and kind of ebb and flow with what they needed. Some people would say, hey, I really need to find investment. My key thing is I'm looking for equity investment. Another one would be like, I just want to build out non-dilutive funding, help me build a strategy for non-dilutive funding. And another one might be like, I really need a strategic partner. So you could, as an EIR, you kind of wear different hats. And, maybe today I'm helping, look at a pitch deck, and there might be another day where you're making cold calls or warm introductions to people in your network. I think that at least at the time that I was at UNC, there was an opportunity to kind of meet the founder where they needed to be at that time.
Yeah, that's pretty. I mean, I love generally how people are structuring this because, having spent way too long in academia myself, there's just a clear misalignment of incentives between sort of academic success and commercialization. And so being able to sort of navigate that and find ways to, bridge the gap, because there's a lot of cool IP. There are some grad students and even some faculty members that are really interested in the commercialization side. But I have also run into my fair share of stories where, folks really want to start a commercialization function at a university and they just don't understand why all the professors and grad students and everybody aren't just like super excited about it. And I think part of it is just kind of not understanding the culture of academia, or at least the traditional culture. And so it's cool to kind of hear stories of you being able to navigate that. Was there anything at kind of UNC that was maybe unique or different? Did you have a chance to sort of compare other academic kind of programs? Because I'm always curious on like what did these places do really well? I'm curious if you have thoughts on kind of UNC's program for that.
Well, maybe not on UNC specifically. So although my role was embedded at UNC Chapel Hill, I worked with professors and innovators at Duke University, at NC State, at any of the universities or colleges. And it didn't even have to be in the universities. It just happened to be that way across North Carolina. I think one of the interesting projects that I got to be a part of that was not directly connected to UNC was doing an impact assessment of clean tech and AgTech incubators across the country. So I was part of a group that did some evaluation, like a gap analysis, and like looking at the follow-on funding for different startups as they've been embedded in certain incubators, and seeing where there's the opportunity for improvement, and how much a network like you have in an EIR program can make an impact on the long-term success of a startup.
I want to double down on this a little bit, because I do think there's something special about North Carolina as a state, and why this sort of works differently from other universities and institutions who might not have the same statewide support as a North Carolina, that I've seen, having been a part of advisory boards for different venture studios involved with different universities. There's something very unique about UNC Chapel Hill in North Carolina as a state, in that there's something embedded in the infrastructure in North Carolina as a state where they want to work with each other. They want to partner a little bit, right? So even within UNC, they have a Power Up Venture Studio that's separate from the actual innovation venture studio, that's separate from another innovation arm, but somehow they talk to each other at times, right? And they also partner with people throughout the state and other universities to feed ideas and different things in. So I think there's something special about the attributes of North Carolina as a state and how they share resources and things, and they don't see it as competing all the time, right? And that creates a unique ecosystem for entrepreneurship as they continue to grow. That's my sort of perspective. I only sit on one advisory board as a part of UNC right now, but from what I've seen, being a part of that for the last 3+ years there, they have very good connectivity to the rest of the ecosystem. They want to play in the sandbox nicely with everybody else. So I'll just add that on from my own sort of perspective and what I've seen in North Carolina personally.
I agree, Terrence. I'll give a little shout out to the group at NC Idea, as well as the North Carolina Center for Entrepreneurial Development, though I think those two organizations are really part of the kind of lifeblood of kind of building that environment of the non-competing environment that we are all part of an ecosystem.
So just to triple down on the network thing. So Tom Maru was at Kauffman Foundation when I was doing the Kauffman Global Scholar Program. And then I actually spent some time in RTP at Cisco in their intellectual property group as part of that. So I've had some exposure to the program as well, but sounds like Tom's doing good work over at NC Idea, which is, showing again how small really at the end of the day the world is. And so it's really cool to hear that come up. But yeah, anyway, I think that connectivity and interaction, I think in some ways, I guess we're sort of cheerleading RTP in North Carolina here, but I'll triple down on it as well. One thing that's different maybe about RTP is that there is, multiple universities very close to each other, and there's also multiple municipalities, and kind of the RTP story of trying to retain talent and ultimately kind of build intellectual capacity in the region over, a pretty long time arc with the IBMs and Cisco's and others, kind of being long-term participants is an interesting one, because that is not that different from the Silicon Valley story, and some of the other big hubs, the Boston story, that there is a anchor corporate and research tenants, there's flagship universities, and sort of the key parts of the ecosystem are, pretty pronounced and good. And it was interesting to sort of observe them all play together. But, at the same time, when you're in RTP, there's still a little bit of friendly rivalry between Duke and UNC and, North Carolina State. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so it's just like, and it was funny because I had to, the same thing happens in Kansas City where, the KU folks and the MU folks and they, everybody sort of has, and I'm like, outside of the region, nobody understands what you're talking about. So the regional approach is way, way better than the sort of local approach. And so it's just funny how that all kind of connects and comes together.
I also think that it's interesting. You mentioned Kansas City and KU, and I was at a biotech meeting recently in Kansas City, and it was interesting I was talking about the RTP area, and then there was like, well, we have our own little thing here in St. Louis. So it was kind of like friendly rivalry between the Missouri side of things as well as the Central North Carolina.
Yeah. Yeah. And as long as everybody's kind of understands what their differentiation is, that's actually really healthy. It's, where I've seen that kind of fall sideways is when if somebody tries to be everybody for everything. And that's really hard to sort of compete with, some of the just older and more dense regions. And so, that's the nice thing about RTP and other places is there's sort of really good foundational elements that you can build on.
Absolutely. I want to talk a little bit about evolution. You've done an incredible job of giving us some history and education around, the EIR role and how you sort of went about it day to day in your day to day role. I'm curious to know your thoughts on how you see the role evolving with time, right? And over time, how do you see the entrepreneur in residence as a role? Doesn't matter the residence. How do you see it evolving?
So interestingly, I have observed this in the last year, and I'm hoping to lean into an opportunity in this area where when I was an entrepreneur in residence at UNC, it wasn't specifically a role in which I would be spinning out with any one specific technology or group. I was more, part coach, part like interim co-founder, or, and bounce ideas off if there wasn't a co-founder. And then there was kind of some part emotional support there as well. But I've been seeing a number of venture studios who are building their own entrepreneur in residence programs where they are hosting entrepreneur in residence to specifically incubate an idea into a new company, and they're funding it. And I think that's a really interesting model and an interesting evolution.
Absolutely. We're seeing a lot of that, in the marketplace. I mean, from venture builders inside of corporates, the ones that are independent from corporates that are venture studios. And, it's kind of this odd thing. You have some venture studios who want to fund the companies that they incubate. You have others who do not want to lead the round and fund the companies that they incubate, because in certain scenarios, it can send a certain signal, right? If I'm the person that I need to lead the round and fund the company for the one that I incubated because no one else will, is there really something there, right? Or, should I get somebody else to lead it to show the value, and I participate to show that I have skin in the game as well, right? So this sort of push and pull a little bit in the ecosystem on what's the right or the wrong way. My own personal opinion is I don't think there's a right or a wrong way. I think is what is best for the founder, and how do you align the incentives across all the people and all the stakeholders involved? Because I think it extends beyond academia. I 100% agree with Ilya. I think it actually goes beyond academia into venture studios, into corporate venture builders, into name your place where somebody has been in residence, where incentives don't align with the person that you're bringing in to actually do the thing. It's going to be an uphill battle. And I've just seen this way too many times, having been a part of 6 venture studios at this point. There's so many different models, and it's not a right or a wrong model. It's sort of how do you actually align the incentives of the person coming into the studio into what you're trying to achieve. So I just think it's a great observation that you have around more EIRs obviously being recruited into venture studios and that role evolving, but they don't need to go out and search for the capital all the time. Sometimes it comes with incubating the company, essentially.
I think it's also there's something that that I've been kind of a part-time coach out that's still at UNC. It's more of like a drop-in thing with some other entrepreneurs. It's a class at UNC that's in the School of Entrepreneurship. And it started out as a venture building class that was assisted with AI, specifically ChatGPT. And I was teaching undergraduate students, like, what is it like to, like, how do you fast track building a venture, and can you use AI to help you do customer discovery in a better way? And this class that's taught by Tom Colopy, he's really innovating, and there's some support from the Central North Carolina entrepreneurship area, like NC Idea. And it's really involved into guiding entrepreneurs on how to effectively build a sales funnel, which I think if you're an entrepreneur in residence, you understand how to get to sales quickly. And I think that's one of the things that venture studios want. I don't know if you've seen that as well in all the venture studios that you've been, like where there's been a good example of the EIR to getting to sales quickly.
Oh, I mean, so I have a ton of examples. I'll keep us here for another hour, but you know, what I've seen them over index on is short sales, but also traction and de-risking the business as much as possible, right? To earn the right for them to actually raise the capital, right? And some of that is proven that you can actually go out and get sales through traction data and other things, right? And I think that's interesting because they're raising capital faster. They're also getting exits faster out of venture studios, and that data's out, right? And I don't want to call the number right now because I can't remember the exact number, but I think they raise around 25% faster or something like that. But, you know, we'll, you know, put that one in the can for right now. But it's a very interesting model. I could talk about venture studios all day long, but I do want to pass it, you know, back over to Ilya after I asked the question around, you know, do you have a dream EIR role that you've thought about, right? And we'll get into some other things that if you could wave a magic wand and decide, I would like to be an EIR in this residence, where would that be?
I don't know if I have a specific one, but I am curious about the venture studio model. Of finding, and I've looked at a couple of them, and I'm currently exploring some of them to see if there's synergy between kind of my expertise is in AgTech and Biotech, but also water and circular economy and the energy, kind of the energy water nexus. So I'm looking at venture studios in those places to see if there's a good fit between any of, some venture studios are backed by an existing bank of IP. And so they actually list IP. They're like, here's our IP that we have connectivity to, and we want people to take this specific IP and move it into a viable business. So I'm just generally curious about those areas.
Yeah, we actually talked about this in the prep a little bit, but maybe one of the things as we were talking about it earlier that I was excited about is just sort of reshaping the PhD experience. So kind of like Deep Science Ventures and some of the work that Activate's doing on, kind of thinking about, hey, you got to write your dissertations. You have to ultimately, pierce a hole in the body of human knowledge, add something, whatever. But also, what if you were in parallel, kind of de-risking the technology, understanding where some of the applicable markets are. In a longer time horizon, it's sort of interesting to think about where do these types of innovations happen, right? Because 50, 80 years ago, some corporations had pretty deep, kind of basic R&D functions. And for the most part, most of that's gone, right? And so thinking about going forward, how does that look? It's interesting to sort of think about. But I think that, that venture studio in an academic setting with sort of the right partners and sort of the right both vertical focus as well as EIR as well as capital is a really interesting sort of channel to kind of help continue to evolve that story.
I'd even argue that, PhDs are, actually in creating more enduring companies when you teach them the skills of entrepreneurship. I think, I don't know what they're doing at Flagship Pioneering, but they're doing something really well to recruit, what they call venture scientists. They're PhDs who they bring into a venture fellowship, for a summer or 3 or 4 months, and they teach them, basically venture building inside of Flagship Pioneering, and how to sort of like use science-based evidence and hypotheses testing towards venture building. So they speak the language of the PhD and the scientists a little bit, but also show them how to take risk in incubating new companies. So I'm going to give a shout out to Flagship Pioneering because they're clearly doing something right. They incubated Moderna during COVID. Everybody knows about Moderna that IPO'd and so on and so forth. And I think I want to say they're also responsible for 25 other, companies that have IPO that they've incubated. So they're doing something right in terms of matching the PhD skill set with the risk taking and the experimentation piece of how entrepreneurs go about trying to build enduring companies. So I think that's interesting. And I think we're going to see more of those models, as we sort of evolve.
Is there EIR specifically at Flagship? I know that there is, some level of that at Activate. Those might be good folks to have on the show.
Yeah, I mean they have they don't call them EIRs at Flagship. They call them venture scientists. So that similar role where you hear somebody call themselves a venture builder versus an EIR.
Yeah, and I think at Activate, they ultimately become fellows, but they're all working on their own kind of venture. And so I've actually run across a bunch of Activate fellows that were kind of working on their venture. And it's funny because there's sort of a long time arc there too, right? Because some of them are just getting out of academia, and then some of them have, successfully commercialized and launched a company, raised funding. And so they've been running for a while now. And so it's interesting to sort of see them across different business life stages.
Actually, one of the last in the last 2 or 3 months that I was an EIR, I was mentoring a young woman who had just finished her PhD. And I was like, it was kind of new. Activate was kind of new to me at the time. And I was like, I think you're a perfect fit for this. And she was accepted as an Activate fellow.
Here's another question that we have for you just before we're about to sort of wrap it up soon. And then I'll pass the ball back to Ilya, which is, I love to ask people, we have these very sort of quilted careers where there's not in a straight line. There's sort of things that sort of happen along the way, and we sort of adapted along the way. And because of that, our careers look like a quilt. And oftentimes people think these things just happen. And I love to talk about things that are not on your resume, things that are not professionally related to you. So can you tell us something, right, that's not on your resume, that people wouldn't get from looking at your LinkedIn profile?
I would say I decided to build my own lab during COVID to do research, and to also teach my children, so science experiments. So, I don't know if it's very obvious that, I originally in my career thought I wanted to be a farmer.
Okay. Say some more.
And farming brought me to working on broken tractors, which ended up working on engines and fuels, which ended up kind of morphing into, a quilted trajectory on innovation.
Fair enough.
Because at the end of it, farmers in this country, in many countries, are natural innovators because of what you had said earlier, Ilya, around, necessity being the mother of invention. And many times farmers, people who are actively in the field working, and they encounter a problem that they have to fix right now, they'll have to innovate and figure out some kind of solution. So if it's a tractor or if it's a challenge with a plant, they end up finding a solution that they didn't start out their day with.
That's right. And farmers also plant seeds that other people get to bear the fruit of later on. So there you go. And they put all the hard work in to do it.
And I love it because throughout this episode, we've planted a bunch of seeds. There's even some sort of requests for or kind of thinking about what are some interesting models in academia, venture studio. I'm excited for sort of our audience in the EIR network to sort of listen to the episodes and maybe, you know, contribute and point out some things that we're not even aware of. You know, I think we named a couple of pretty interesting programs and some things that we're excited about, but it's going to be great to hear what folks that are kind of listening and engaged are excited about as well. So, Rachel, as we wrap up here, what's a good way for folks to connect with you and kind of follow your work and, you know, kind of reach out if it makes sense?
Sure. I would say probably LinkedIn is one place. I'm actively working with a waste and energy firm called ProcessWorks in process engineering. We like to get our hands dirty there. And I'm still engaged in the entrepreneurial community here in Central North Carolina. An advisor, grant reviewer, supporter of NC IDEA.
Well, really appreciate the time and the discussion. And as always, there was, you know, a couple turns and we got to dig into some awesome and somewhat unexpected topics. And so really appreciate you spending some time with us and, you know, helping us build the EIR Live network.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us on EIR Live. We hope today's episode offered you valuable insights into the entrepreneurial journey. Remember to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes, and check out the description for more details. Do you have questions or suggestions? Please reach out to us. Connect with us on social media. We really value your input. Catch us next time for more inspiring stories and strategies. Keep pushing boundaries and making your mark on the world. I'm Terrence Orr with my co-host Ilya Tabak, signing off. Let's keep building.